Union Bank, your simpler, smarter bank.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on the Feel Good Friday edition of Freshly Pressed 981. There'll be a few laughs this morning, a few shaking my head moments with Waji and Tunde Okufi. Good morning, Waji.
Good morning, Valentine. Good morning, Ayo. What's
Good
happening
morning.
today? And good morning, Lagos.
Thank you for joining us today. Good morning.
Morning, Valentine. Good morning, Naya.
Good morning
Morning,
today.
Maji.
Good morning. Please join on YouTube to see the wonderful faces, beautiful faces of my analyst and Ayo Myro essay. And watch us with our analysis. Share your comments on that platform as well. Type Smooth FM Lagos in the search box to find and share.
That's right. You can also send us a message on WhatsApp. 0809 444 is the number. You can send your message through that platform. We'll get straight into our stories for today, and I'll be starting with you today. Court refuses to grant Rivers Lagos's request to stop the Federal Inland Revenue Service (FIRS) from collecting value-added tax (VAT). This report is from the Premium Times. So the Rivers and Lagos state governments yesterday Thursday failed to convince the Court of Appeal in Abuja to stop the FIRS from further collecting VAT. Now, according to this report, the court refused oral applications for a restraining order against the FIRS made by the legal team of the two states. I'm sure you've been following the VAT River State against the FIRS from the River State High Court to the appeal court in Abuja. We've already had conversations around why it was moved from Port Harcourt to Abuja, and now Lagos State, despite passing a law on VAT and signing it off, have been stopped by the appeal court. Please take us through, and I would like to know your thoughts on this.
Well, I mean, my initial thought is that this is far from over. This saga, as it has played out publicly, will continue to rage. And the thing that is becoming more and more apparent, and regardless of whatever side you fall on,
Yeah.
those who are saying, "Oh, this is a form of fiscal federalism." Like, if you can't have proper political federalism, it's if you control the finances, and ultimately maybe you arrive at the same position. To other op-eds that have said that it's not as simple as the states just charging for VAT within their jurisdiction, saying that value, that if you look at the entire value chain, that value is added to products in many different jurisdictions, and it's not just where it is consumed. So all those debates are going on. But one thing is clear, that this is one issue that we will find it difficult, even for the courts, I dare say, to separate the politics, from the law, from the letter of the law. Because I mean, if you would go by some of the arguments, and I'm not a constitutional lawyer by any standards, is that the states do have the backing of the law supposedly to do this. That VAT isn't contained within the Constitution, and it's well within their rights, and that the FIRS the Federal Inland Revenue Service, shouldn't have been collecting it all these years. It begs that's the serious matter. It begs us, makes us one wonder why, after so many years of democracy, our state governments are just waking up to that. But if you put that aside, the argument is that they do have the rights to do this. And I remember early on in one of the earlier episodes of this saga, when FIRS said that they were going to request a stay of action, appeal this. One of the legal arguments was they don't even have a basis to make an appeal, that this is it's like almost like it's black and white, since it's backed by law. But they were successful in that, and they've gotten their status quo. Lagos State and River State are now had made an oral petition that that the status quo be that the injunction they received be set aside. And again, some technicalities were applied. One, they say it's not that they've said their request or the application is without merit. They're not saying it's without merit. They're saying they won't accept an oral application. Go and make it, go and file it properly. These are the indications and connotations that underscore the political nature of this. Because I mean, we know we can either speed things up or drag them out. this one is being dragged out,
Yeah.
right? Again, not an expert, but you're before the court. If the court's competent to preside over a matter, why can't it take the oral application, right? Then other technicalities like Lagos, essentially, I'm putting in layman's terms, that Lagos State doesn't even have any right to be making any conversation or making any petitions or prayers within this, because they're not yet officially joined to the suit. Lagos State that's a separate matter. So they didn't, bottom line, didn't even hear what Lagos State had to say, that you're not yet at the table. So all sorts of legalese and technicalities are being applied to slow this down. Essentially, it's a hot button issue, naturally, and it's one that has political undertones, has regional undertones, social political undertones. So I guess everyone it's a softly kind of approach, and it remains to be seen where this will land. If history is anything to go by, in this part of the world, I mean, the center, the federal government has a lot more powers than the states. It will be the wrong thing for them to sort of bear an influence on the courts, but that may just be what happens, but we'll see how it all plays out.
All right, we'll see how it all plays out. And according to the report, a date to be communicated to lawyers, to the parties, as soon as the ruling is ready. So we don't have a date yet. And once that's settled, we'll definitely let you know. And let's move on to our next story here. And it's from the Guardian newspaper, Waji. Buhari has changed. APC not same party I criticized, says Fani Kayode. So from this report, we have that it became the hottest topic in Nigeria's political circle after FFK his unexpected decision to pitch tent with the ruling All Progressives Congress 7 years after leaving the party to become a fierce critic of President Muhammadu Buhari. And people might wonder, I don't think people will wonder, but in case you wonder why this is such a big, this is such big news, I guess it's just a picture of politics in Nigeria. It paints a picture of politics in Nigeria to a certain extent, bearing in mind that he was very vocal about his stance against APC, and had famously said that he'd rather die than join the ruling party. He said that he believes that their ideologies the leadership has changed, and the party is the same. So I would love to hear your thoughts on this one.
Sure. All right. Let me kick off with this wonderful quote by former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. This was during the Nixon administration in the U.S. in the 70s, that coined this fantastic statement that in politics there are no permanent enemies or friends, only permanent interests. And I think we need to appreciate that when it comes to understanding why people like to cross the aisle when it comes to politics, because interests shift from now and then. Ayo, like you had indicated, this is the man who was extremely vocal and extremely critical of not just President Buhari, but of also most APC individuals that were coming in at that particular time. And I think for me, the one that really stood out among his many criticisms of that administration in the early days was the one he put towards Rotimi Amechi, which was very personal, when he referenced that his father was among the signatories and authors of the Declaration of Independence, and Rotimi Amechi's father was a palm wine tapper. So these are the kind of words that FFK has been known to use in very vocal and loud terms over the years. And it's been no indication about how harsh he is. So I appreciate the shock value that this has created. It has now brought about, this Samuel Beckett theater of the absurd, where everybody's now reacting to it. But if you go back to the initial statement I made about no permanent interest, no permanent friends or enemies, is only permanent interest, then you can begin to understand the underlying why FFK is making this move. Clearly, we have an election coming up in just under 2 years. We have a situation where there are rumors about JEG coming back into the foray. So him now going from one party to another frees up, opens a door for JEJ. There are all sorts of things, but I think it's important we read in between lines. It is what it is. These things do happen. I appreciate the shock of it, but people just have to appreciate and understand that there are certain interests at play that is making FFK now move towards APC, a party that he was extremely critical of. He's making all these statements about he was among the founders of
Yes, of the APC.
APC, but then he went back to PDP
Yeah.
at that particular time. So there are many things in which you can argue and against, but I think people just need to appreciate that there's a larger play at hand.
Yes.
These individuals are tactical chess masters when it comes to politics. Never get that mistaken for 1 second. Do not be fooled by their appearances and by their absurdity at times. These individuals know what they're doing and they do like to play the long game.
It was the APC before until June of 2014.
Yeah, he wasn't there long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although I wonder what
That's-
people are saying, because there are a lot of talk about, Lai Mohammed being scared. That you should be weary of Fani Kayode.
He should be.
Why?
Because FFK could do a better job at that position. And
think?
that, yes, I do think that.
Or from the
I do.
perspective of the federal government or the APC?
From the
not
federal
people.
government. No, and I'm being very sincere. I'm not a fan, but
Yeah.
but Lai Mohammed should be worried because that is something FFK not only knows how to do, but knows how to do well. Okay, you can argue all you want, but you can't argue against results. So to that point, Valentine, I do agree with that. Yes.
All right. Thank you. Shegun says,
Interesting.
Fani Kayode. That is Niger politics for you. However, Shehu Sani also joined PDP yesterday, and he also criticized PDP in the past, so they are all the same. Kingsley Jegun says, my issue here is not that FFK defected to APC, but seeing Buhari posing a picture with him. This shows that both Buhari and FFK has no do and don't. For
They
them,
don't have any
do's or don'ts.
and don'ts. Yeah.
For them, everything is a goal, because the photo ops were very deliberate. They were
Of course.
really intentional.
Of course.
It was very
So I said
strategic.
they know what they're doing. You know.
All right, let's move on to other stories. I'm sure we have a number of comments on this particular one as expected. But Tunde, stop using chemical containers to store food, says the National Agency for Food and Drug Administration Control, according to their Director General, Professor Christiana Adeyeye, who gave this warning yesterday in Onitsha, Anambra State, during a sensitization campaign. The report is in the Guardian newspaper, and a few important reminders for us, or perhaps pointers to some people who might not be aware in this report. So please help us share.
I mean, if you ever needed reminding that you're in the third world, it's it's the level of so our own recycling is doesn't or reuse is not that you put plastics and then you send them down to the recycling plant. It is that you take a keg that previously contained brake fluid or engine oil, wash it out with hot water and soap, and then use it to drink water.
Literally.
Yes,
That's,
you know.
I've seen it done.
Or to sell oil.
Or to sell
commercial.
oil. Yeah,
Commercial.
sell oil. It's normal, right?
It's oil and oil.
Yeah, it's even, to be honest, I mean, if you cast those who were around in the 80s, if you cast your mind back, a lot of, I remember a number of households would serve water in what was previously either, cooking oil isn't better, but some of these kegs were engine oil kegs, the 4-liter ones, right? And they'd be in the freezer in ice water.
That
It's
takes
not-
away the taste of the oil, the previous
You know,
oil.
aren't you, sir? It was a kerosene can.
Yeah,
They were putting water
yeah,
in. I don't know why. I don't know why you're being coy. It was literally a kerosene can.
that is true.
And you take it. Remember the blue one and the brown one?
yep.
And you take it out of your freezer.
Yes, and it's
Yeah.
have a funky sense.
Yeah.
And you drank. And maybe that's why we're not catching COVID.
We've come a long way from those days, but we're still nowhere near where we should be, right? Just go to the markets. You see them sell food produce in what was previously chemical cans, and it's again, it's a reminder of when, if you ever want a reminder, you're in the third world. But I mean, the duty of this is to bring it forward and sensitize people first and foremost, because things also happen. There's things that happens out of necessity, just like the issue where refuge is everywhere and littering is everywhere because there are not enough bins and waste isn't. So it's not just that people want to be misbehave, but they sometimes don't have any alternatives, right? So it's a mixture of alternatives and education. So this one is the education one, right? Let people know at least that it's not safe. hopefully it will change. But as you educate them, there also need to be, alternatives and better oversight, so to say, in the entire value chain of the things that we consume. Even we can't be talking about two sides of our mouth. Even in food production, in farming, we use pesticides to a heavy level. We can't export, you can't import your our beans to the UK, for instance, because and to most of the West Coast, we use too much pesticide, right? Even when you go to the market, sometimes there've been all those videos of people, spraying beans with sniper, before it's sold to people. So it's the whole thing. It's not just about plastic containers.
Yeah.
It's a whole attitude to health and safety, right? Especially as it comes to the things that we consume and produce.
I have a question. Sorry, I have a question. So how do the people get protected? Because this is one of the, I would imagine, the responsibilities of NAFTA.
Yep.
So I appreciate the sensitization. However, how about actually stopping it? Because as a consumer, for me, I'm thinking, my goodness, I'm going to the market thinking I'm going to buy what's edible in terms of beans, and I don't know what the sellers have done to the beans. Do we completely stop eating certain types of food, or should NAFDAC perhaps, in addition to sensitization campaigns, take it to the people, to the marketplaces, and also have a way of checking these things to ensure that we're not endangering the lives of consumers?
They should. The question is the size of the problem. I'd even almost argue that the size of the problem is it's one of those problems that is interdepartmental or interagency, if you get what I mean.
Yeah.
So clearly NAFDAC has a key role to play, maybe even a coordinating role, but I think it's beyond what NAFDAC in and of itself alone can cover, to be fair and to be honest.
Because when you talk about that area, you have, I think NAFDAC have their work cut out for them in Anambra State, which is
already
highly industrialized. Like there are a lot of businesses that are not regulated, so it's hard to track down these people who are collecting containers from these boys who pick on the side of the road.
It even goes to the there's a waste disposal in that. All those who's picking those things up.
Exactly.
Some of these things even contain dangerous chemicals beforehand. We don't even have a way for this. We shouldn't even point engine oil in the gutter or wherever it is down the drain as we do. They're supposed to, but we don't have any of these things. So there's also, again, summaries. If you ever want to be remembered, you won't ever want to remind that you're in the third world.
I think this is also
like
a business idea for someone who's listening. There's a business. I know some people are taking that up in terms of waste disposal and the like. Yes, recycling. All right, let's move on to our next story, Waji. FCC, that's the Federal Character Commission. House frowns on violation of federal character principle by Buhari, this day reports. So the House of Representatives has decried the violation of the federal character principle by the President following the recent appointment of the Secretary and Chairman of the FCC itself from the same zone. Please.
I mean, there are many ways to look at this, and I think the first one is actually, when you begin to, on a very personal level, agree with this charter and whether it should exist or not. There are people that understand and say that it promotes inclusiveness when you can now begin to ensure that you have different people from all over the country represented in different facets of government. But what it now does is create a very bloated federal government, because you now have all these different ministers that are doing overlapping jobs in the name of federal character. So once again, it's a personal thing depending on how you look at it, because the question should now be, shouldn't we just all be Nigerians? Let's get the best hands, and it doesn't matter where the best hands come from. But in line with that actual federal character principle, which, when you think of the history of it, actually goes back to the end of the Civil War. It came about to ensure that we create some kind of unity and everything else. So like I said, it's personal depending on how you look at it. But with regards to the specific story, and it's something that President Buhari has been accused of on many angles, which is appointing people in key positions from a particular zone. And in line with this particular argument that the House have brought up, is that the Chief Commissioner the Chief Commissioner of the Public Complaint Commission and the Secretary of the Commission are from the same part of the country. And that should not be the case, because these are two sensitive positions within the Public Complaint Commission, and you should have some level of diversity. So, like I said, in principle, you can begin to argue it. You can akin it to what you have in America with the affirmative action situation, where it now ensures that for every 6 or 5 key positions, you must include women, you must include African Americans, you must include Latin Americans and things of that nature, to ensure that you don't have a specific group that dominates, an organization or an entity. So once again, I think it's a personal thing how you see it, because some people believe let the get the best job, but other people say, well, you actually have to mandate situations to force inclusiveness. So it's a personal decision how you see it. So I think in line with the charter itself, the House do have a valid argument regarding not honoring that particular charter.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Wajim.
Today, thank you. Let's jump quickly to this next story from Premium Times. Remember the bombing, the souls of the dead rest in peace. The Nigerian Air Force had initially said or released a statement very quickly, saying that they were not responsible for that, it was just a recce that was carried out on the Unusari local government area of Buhari village. Interesting name. But now, 24 hours later, they came back to claim responsibility. While I think it's honorable for them to have claimed responsibility, but what's with the misinformation that's going about?
I mean, as you are opening up a story and you're saying, may the souls of the, the past rest in peace. I'm like, when will we stop hearing that? When we get tired of saying those things. But yeah, it is what it is, and it's very unfortunate. Like you said, the flip flop. So many questions. It looks mundane, but it leaves more unanswered than it answers. Right? Did they really carry out this attack, or was it Niger? Or they've now realized that it is less embarrassing that it be Niger without their knowledge, one, or even if it is the chain of command within the Air Force, it's also a problem that you have a tactical unit doing things and other areas don't know.
Even yesterday, they were saying there were rumors about it being a coordinate issue. Wrong coordinate.
Wrong coordinate sense. It's just embarrassing on any level that you look at it, right? And it's a microcosm of the Nigerian nation states. A mess.
All right. Dr. Lawal on YouTube says, keep educating the populace. Sad fact of the Nigerian society is we have an ineffective government. So we need to keep educating the people. We're a developing country, not a third world country.
Okay.
Potato. Okay. The Vanguard has this next story, which I would like us to go into this. Governor Bello Matawale of Zamfara State seems to have woken up this morning to say, it was yesterday, to say that, we expected more from the bandits, but this is me paraphrasing though. He disclosed it at the State House in Abuja when he was visiting the president. If you recall, the bandits had held that state hostage, that led to the security situation that brought them to the point where they had to shut off telco services in that area. Right. The reports alludes to the fact that people, the citizens, are experiencing some relative peace. But he says in hindsight, it sounds familiar. In hindsight, he regrets making that decision of making that arrangements with the bandits that they reneged on their promise. How do you trust bandits? Well, terrorists, because we call them terrorists, they call them bandits. Right. How do you trust them to agree?
Well, you don't. This is what happens when you negotiate with terrorists, bandits. It's literally just part of what comes with it. But on his own admission, he regrets actually going into that conversation, going into those kind of dealings and arbitration to do things amicably. And he had to end at the decision point that he ended at, which is we need to take them out and we need to root them out. Because for me, the fundamental principle goes back to a quote that I just love saying over and over again. You cannot reason with a tiger when your head is in his mouth. Mm-hmm. And that's just the simple fact of it. And when you continue to operate from that perspective, these are the things that will happen, because that tiger will eventually bite your head off and digest it gladly. So it's good that they've come to this admission. Things have, for the time being, have relatively peace has relatively restored to that part of the country, that specific state, Zamfara. So maybe this is a lesson for all governors and people in leadership positions, that these are the conversations you kind of go into. That at the point that you see groups of people inciting insecurity within certain regions in Nigeria, you have to operate from a very swift and decisive point of view and not get into negotiations with people that only want to ensure that they cause maximum destruction.
With that said, where is that going to take us? Now that there seems to have been a proper plan or structured plan put in place to reintegrate the bandits, the terrorists, into communities, is that going to change the standpoint?
I think both can happen side by side. I honestly believe that. I think you can use the rule of absolute force to ensure that you restore peace. And then at the same time, you can come up with reintegration programs to make sure that people are welcome back into society. Both can happen simultaneously. It's not, you don't have to pick one over the other.
Okay.
But in order for you to restore peace and to ensure you don't have a continuation, it's literally the definition of nation building. Valentine, when you actually think about it, because nation building is a very Cold War tactic where we go in, level, destroy. And for those that survive, let's make sure we give you something to continue to live by so that you don't come back and continue the problems. So that's literally what that is.
But doesn't this speak to a wider conversation in terms of how our response to criminals broadly? So beyond terrorism, banditry, we look at the criminal justice system in Nigeria, and I believe that the reason why a number of people are a bit maybe reluctant to accept this is because that same goodwill or that same tactic is not extended to the wider society. We have a big problem with integration.
So let me tackle that. You see, your judiciary, which your police force is connected to, is meant to handle domestic affairs, right? Now, any form of terrorism and banditry falls outside of the ambit of the judiciary because oftentimes the judiciary is not equipped to handle that nature of criminality because of the coordinated efforts, how they attack, the reasons why they do it, et cetera, which is why the security forces of the federal government step in and now do not go through the judiciary process. So to your point, with regular criminal cases, where you're supposed to have due process, you're supposed to have right of law, legal representation, that still should be strengthened. That still should be emboldened so that there isn't an abuse and there isn't an overlap of what the state security services are doing to root out banditry, to root out terrorism, and then now conflate and confuse it with criminal actions that the judiciary and the police should be handling. So I think it's important people understand the distinction between the two. They're very separate cases, and we should also make sure the individuals ruling these things do not confuse the two as well.
Thank you,
All right,
Raji.
thank you.
Back to you today. New Telegraph reports on the developments on that loan that the president had sought to the National Assembly's approval on, the $4 billion, and 710 million euros to fund the deficit of the 2021 budget. The House of Representatives, the Honorable Benjamin Okezwe-Kalu, representing APC Abia State, said that the House had decided that it would only approve the loan on the condition that details of how it would be spent and provided, are provided, really. That goes to the question we asked on the day we took this story. What are these loans going to be used for? Give us specifics. What are your thoughts?
It's not even the barest minimum. It's the barest minimum that we must know what for and how it to be expended, because we're burdening not just the present, we're burdening future generations, as they say. This is something hanging around their necks that they will have to pay. Ultimately, look, regardless of the opinion you have as to, we all have those people that, that live beyond their means and they have to borrow, to maintain a certain lifestyle. That's Nigeria at the moment. You can make the argument that in nation building, as a nation, we're not talking about personal finance here, that when you're in trouble, sometimes you need to spend your way out of trouble. That's what happens in the West. When there's an economic downturn, they put in all sorts of fiscal packages and spend their way out of trouble. When they don't have that money, they also borrow it, so America borrows, that's not strange. So it's not, borrowing is not the problem. The thing is when you don't have any results from the borrowing. Because you can borrow to run a business venture, it's profitable, things are fine, everyone is happy. The problem here is we've been borrowing, or this administration, throughout we've been borrowing, but it's been particularly heavy the last couple of years. In the past 7 years, very little, results or anything to show for it. We feel like a very, at least I do feel like a very cap in hand sort of nation. We set up this budget and say, these are the things that I need. Imagine you have a brother who, comes to you and then says, for me to send my children to school, pay this, pay that, run the house, and run my 10 cars, this is the bill. Meanwhile, I have less than a third of what I need. You need to cover the rest. You ask him, why don't you, sell off, some of the cars? Why don't you, the size of government, so many things that we can do differently, right? But we're not. I'd say asking for what to be spent for is the barest minimum. but we need to see results from this borrowing, because that was the argument from the previous, Minister of Finance, and I'm sure the current one too, that Nigeria has. We agree Nigeria has to borrow, no problem, but we must see the results. And the argument for the heavy borrowing at the time was that there are huge plans, like I said, to spend our way out of trouble. There need to be huge capital projects to pull ourselves out of this. But guess what? In 2021 budget, there's only 26% that's dedicated to capital expenditure. So what are they borrowing for? They're borrowing to line their pockets and pay their income and pay their salary and continue the largesse. That's what this is. It's largesse. And these guys, I also dare say, the House are asking, the reason why they ask for details is so that they can plug themselves into the largesse as well.
So it's not really about us. Wow,
It's never been about us.
I was just hoping that some ray of light somewhere. But anyway, just as a means of mention, the final story that I'll probably not have time to touch on is COVID-19. A story from the Punch newspaper. Please read up. UK may list Nigeria as travel risk. Yeah, so that's coming. Thank you, Waji.
Oh, do you want me to comment on that?
Well, you can.
Yeah, I mean, it's very possible if and the reasons being is because we're not, and it's mostly connected back to the doctor strike. If we do not prove that we can handle the bare minimum cases, not about the number, then the UK would just gladly say, okay, well, let's put you on the red list for a little while until you get your act together.
And that has a way of breaking up the government, isn't it? When we have international sanctions like this, you won't be able to go to the UK.
Do you understand? No, so those are clear consequences. Before it was just in domestic tussle. Fighting and arguing.
So red zone.
Now we understand that we can't leave our houses.
No, you can, but when you're on the red list, when you travel, there are certain conditions. You have to quarantine. 14 days, specific location.
That's the same thing as if I want to travel for 1 week, I can't.
Basically, you can't. Yeah. And you have to pay for that location as well.
Feel Good Friday, yeah. 2 minutes past 8 o'clock. Thank you, Waji. Waji, the corporate MC. Corporate is with a K. Tunde Okufi at Big Coast. Thank you so much for
Thank you very much.
In 8 minutes, we'll have a few laughs. Lagos Talks 981 with Ayomara Ese.
And Valentine Ogo.
Good morning.
Union Bank, your simpler, smarter bank.